Chapter 1. The Widow's Inheritance. Picture. This. It's April 1832, plunging you deep into the suffocating, sticky heat of eastern Louisiana, where the mighty Mississippi River doesn't just flow, it rages like a living beast unchained from hell itself. Swollen fat from brutal upstream rains pounding the Ohio Valley and melting snow cascading down from the icy northern wastes, this big muddy monster slams relentlessly against shaky, crumbling levees, hand-built by desperate men. Entire cotton fields, years of back-breaking labor, tear away like nothing more than soggy scraps of yesterday's newspaper, sucked into the churning abyss. Massive oaks and cypresses crash downstream in a tangle of splintered trunks. Entire riverside cabins vanish overnight into the frothy moor, and the air hangs so thick with the rancid stench of churned earth, rotting crops, and death-soaked mud that it coats your throat like a curse. This is the savage world Madeline LeClerc leaves behind when he hacks out his final, gurgling, blood-flecked breath in the upstairs bedroom of Belle Grove Plantation, a once grand federal-style estate now sagging pitifully under peeling white columns flaking like old skin, warped verandas choked with tangled vines clawing for light, and fields transformed into useless, sticky gumbo mud by relentless flood after flood that mocked every planter's dream. Etienne, that rough-edged Creole planter with a laugh like gravel crunching under boot heels and a fatal weakness for the smoky temptations of riverboat card tables, faro, poker, dice that always rolled snake eyes, had been fading for weeks, his body a battlefield. Pneumonia clawed at his lungs like a feral cat, turning every tortured cough into a wet, rattling death knell that echoed through the house's creaking halls, sending chills through slaves huddled in the yard and family alike. His wife, Madeline LeClerc, 33 years old, sharp as a freshly honed cane knife glinting in the sun, with hawk-like green eyes that pierced souls and dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painted on like war paint, doesn't shatter into hysterics or swoon dramatically for the neighbours to cluck over at St. Landry Parish Church come Sunday. No, ma'am. As the black-robed priest mutters his final perfunctory prayers over the deathbed and the enslaved gather silently in the yard below, heads bowed, eyes flickering with a mix of fear and fleeting hope, she marches downstairs to the parlour with the stride of a general entering battle. She shoves aside half-empty brandy bottles, still sweating beads of liquor, crushed cigar stubs reeking of cheap tobacco, and yanks open the heavy ledgers with hands steady as steel. The numbers assault her like a merciless swarm of Louisiana mosquitoes at dusk. 1,200 hard-won acres mortgaged 3 times over to sharp-eyed, vulture-like bankers prowling the levees of New Orleans, their ink pens dripping with interest that compounded like poison. Cotton yields gutted to ribbons by the economic crash of 1830, already sinking its teeth in deep. Markets flooded with cheap bales from upriver, prices tanking faster than a drunk off a flatboat. Back-to-back floods in 30 and 31 had drowned the richest bottomlands in muddy graves, leaving the soil so exhausted it grew nothing but stubborn weeds and whispers of ruin. 43 enslaved people scribbled coldly in the inventory column like livestock at market. Strong field hands like Jacob the blacksmith with arms thick as oak trunks forged in endless fire. Young mothers like Eliza, who'd already birthed 3 healthy kids without a whisper of complication, down to wide-eyed toddlers barely weaned and clinging to skirts. Every single one of them collateral, chained to Etienne's endless gambling debts that piled higher than the levees. He'd bet the sugar mill once in a fevered haze on a riverboat, lost it on a bad hand of faro to a grinning Mississippi gambler, then charmed it back with honeyed promises no soul in the parish believed anymore. Neighbours gathered at crossroads, stores whispered Belle Grove was cursed straight from the devil's own hand, a white elephant bloated and ready for the auction block's merciless hammer. 2 days after the plain pine box, nailed shut in haste, hits the soft graveyard soil behind the chapel, the estate lawyer clatters up the rutted drive on a lathered, foam-flecked mule, his dusty frock coat plastered with sweat and red clay dust from Baton Rouge. Pierre Duval, a balding attorney with a voice like dry cornbread crumbling in your mouth and eyes perpetually squinted against the sun, spreads the yellowed papers across the dining table under the flickering, unreliable light of a chandelier missing half its dangling crystals. "Sell it all, Madame LeClerc," he drawls, slow and deliberate, fanning himself with a crumpled mortgage note yellowed from handling. The people go down river to those Natchez auctions. Prime hands might fetch $1,200 a head if the buyers are feeling generous, but the old ones, the lame, the spent, straight river fodder for the gators and catfish. The land, chopped into ragged parcels for land-hungry speculators circling like wolves. She'd scraped together just enough for a cramped, narrow shotgun house in New Orleans' gritty Treme district. Maybe eke out a living as a seamstress if her fingers didn't blister first from the needle. No bank in creation would touch a widow standing alone. No male kin to co-sign the papers. No guardian to nod solemn approval in a world that viewed women as delicate, ornamental extensions of their husbands' wills, unfit for the brutal arithmetic of survival. "Your father in the Vieux Carré could take you in, non?" Duval adds, pity pooling in his watery eyes like rainwater in a ditch. "Many widows do. It's the way of things." Madeline listens without a flicker, her long, ink-stained fingers drumming a slow, ominous rhythm on the table's scarred oak surface, pocked from years of spilled drinks and family fights. But her mind races miles away, back to the creaking loft above her father's bustling counting house on Decatur Street in the heart of the Vieux Carré. Papa, old Jean-Baptiste Moreau, a wiry merchant who'd fled the bloody chaos of Haiti's slave revolts with gold coins sewn tight into the lining of his coat and terror in his heart, taught her the black art of ledgers before she could even stumble through a novel. "Numbers don't lie, ma fille," he'd growl over steaming mugs of coffee laced with chicory, his tobacco-stained finger tracing endless columns of sugar tonnage, slave auction prices, and shipping manifests with the precision of a surgeon. People do. Husbands with wandering eyes, bankers with hidden fees, hurricanes that swallow empires whole. Mama, descended from the faded, arrogant plantocracy of Saint-Domingue, would whisper hushed tales by candlelight of grand estates, built not just on whips, but on careful pairings, deep in the quarters, secrets that turned failing lands into fortunes. Madeline had married Etienne at 19, not for his gravel laugh or fleeting charm, but for his sprawling land and the LeClerc name that opened doors in New Orleans salons. For 5 golden, intoxicating years, Belle Rive thrived like a fever dream. Cotton bales floated fat and white downriver to market, profits glittering at exclusive quadroon balls, where silk gowns swirled under crystal chandeliers. Then the cracks spiderwebbed through it all, the great floods swallowing fields, the market crash starving the ledgers, Etienne's losses piling up like driftwood jammed against the levees after a storm. As dusk bleeds a bruised purple across the wide gallery porch, she paces restlessly outside, the relentless cicadas screaming from the ancient live oaks like 1,000 tiny demons heralding apocalypse. Her sons watch her from the creaking porch swing, fatherless shadows in a crumbling world. Henri, 14, and already broad-shouldered like a man grown, whip-smart with hands calloused from hauling 100-pound sacks of seed like they were feathers. Lucien, 11, wiry and silent as a ghost, his eyes missing nothing, absorbing the estate's rot like a sponge. They'll inherit this festering mess, or whatever scraps remain after the vultures pick it clean. From the quarters beyond the detached kitchen yard, low, haunted murmurs drift on the humid breeze. Men sharpening hoes by flickering firelight with strokes like whispered threats. Women braiding their girls' hair tight while murmuring prayers against auction blocks that split mothers from babies without a shred of mercy. Families shattered like cheap crockery. Sell it all? Families torn asunder, shipped in chains to the hells of Texas frontier plantations or Alabama's fever swamps. Keep fighting? No cash left to buy fresh hands at market, soil too tired and salted to yield. The overseer vanished last month chasing fool's gold in distant California, leaving whips idle and fields fallow. That night, with shutters rattling like angry spirits in a gathering storm that promises to drown the world anew, Madeline bolts Etienne's study door tight, the room reeking of stale tobacco, spilled bourbon staining the rug like old blood, and the sharp tang of regret hanging heavy as fog. A single whale oil lamp spits jagged shadows across the walls as she cracks open the master ledger one final fateful time, pages yellowed and dog-eared from desperate revisions. Buying new slaves. Natchez prices spiked 30% after the panic, and no widow commands credit in this man's world. Natural births in the quarters? 15 long years before a toddling infant swings a full-grown hoe, if malaria's yellow fever or dysentery's bloody grip doesn't claim them first, as it does half the young ones every season. Planters would joke crude over whiskey jugs about encouraging pairings in the quarters, doling out extra cornmeal or a rare Sunday off to big broods, but it was all haphazard, wasteful chaos, births scattered like buckshot, half dying before they worked a day. What if she designed it? Turn desperation into a machine of flesh and blood. Select the strongest like prime breeding stock. Jacob's iron lungs bellowsing from the forge's eternal fires. Eliza's wide hips proven fertile through 3 live births. Pair them ruthlessly, surgically. Engineer loyalty not through whips cracking bloody backs or hollow sermons on obedience, but through unbreakable blood ties binding every future worker to Belle Rive, to her name, to her legacy, chains forged in wombs, invisible and eternal as the river's muddy chains. And her own boys? Henri's raw vigour pulsing like a stallion, Lucien's cunning fox-sharp mind, mere tools in the ledger when the cold math demanded their inclusion. Dawn creeps in slow and merciless, grey skies rain-lashed and weeping, as she cracks open a fresh journal of supple Morocco leather, its blank pages crisp and innocent as new-minted banknotes waiting for sin. Left column, names etched with precision, ages, ruthless traits. Jacob, 26, blacksmith, peak strength, no scars marring the canvas, lungs of iron. Eliza, 22, 3 live births, obedient as dawn. Right column, empty lines hungry for the engineered harvest, timelines branching like veins. At the top, in slashing French script, carved like a blood vow into bone, mon héritage, my legacy. Parish gossips at Sunday Mass saw only a black-veiled widow kneeling piously, head bowed in feigned grief, tears glistening like dew on her cheek. They missed the predator uncoiling slow and lethal in the shadows. Belle Rive wasn't crumbling into the Mississippi's insatiable jaws. No, it was seeding an empire of flesh and forbidden ambition, born from raw desperation, forged in calculating darkness, and utterly unstoppable. Chapter 2. Selecting the Roots. With her die cast forever in that rain-lashed study, Madeline LeClerc wasted not a single heartbeat of daylight. By the first full day after a watery dawn broke over Belle Rive, the sky still bruised purple from the storm, drips pattering from the sagging eaves like a hesitant applause, she was already moving through her domain like a general marshalling shadowy troops for an unseen war. Silent as a spectre, precise as a clockmaker setting gears, utterly invisible to the prying parish eyes that might squint from the rutted river road beyond the cane brakes. No grand announcements thundering from the gallery, no dramatic decrees scrawled on parlour notepaper for gossips to devour. Just a poised widow, managing her late husband's affairs, as she'd flash a thin, practiced smile to any nosy neighbour, clopping up with a foil-wrapped ham, or hollow condolences reeking of pity. But behind the lace curtains and sun-bleached shutters, her ledger-born nightmare snapped into ruthless motion, igniting with the most critical, make-or-break step: selection. Not the random, sloppy pairings of those ham-fisted breeders upriver who tossed couples together like dice in a gut-bucket game. Oh no, Madeline craved perfection engineered to atomic precision. Bodies forged like iron for endless grueling seasons, hacking cotton under a blistering sun, minds pliable enough to chain not just with cold iron, but with the unbreakable shackles of blood itself. She launched her inspection at first light, slipping from the big house before the plantation roosters could unleash their guttural warnings to wake the quarters. Dressed in a plain muslin gown, she deliberately dirtied herself, splashing red clay from the path and grinding field dust into the hem to blend with the labourers. No fine widow's silks or lace that would scream, "Mistress abroad." Notebook tucked tight under her arm like a forbidden holy book clutched by a heretic, she strode alone into the heart of the slave quarters, where the air hung heavy with the sour tang of unwashed bodies, cook smoke, and despair. The cabins huddled in two ragged, defeated rows, snaking beyond the looming sugar house. Low-slung shanties cobbled from weathered cypress planks and mud-daubed plaster. Roofs patched desperately with dried palmetto fronds that flapped like dying flags in the breeze. Doorways draped with threadbare quilts flapping against the perpetual damp that seeped into bones. Lazy smoke curled from sputtering cook fires where women stirred bubbling cornmeal mush in dented iron pots blackened by endless use. Half-naked children scampered whooping through the red dirt paths, kicking up dust devils, and men shouldered axes or hoes with the heavy resignation of dawn's eternal sentence, trudging toward fields that would chew their souls by dusk. 43 souls in total, flickering like candle flames in her ledger's unforgiving arithmetic. But Madeline's hawk-green eyes sliced through them like a surgeon's scalpel fresh from the whetstone, cataloguing every microscopic flaw, every gleaming asset, in the harsh, revealing light of her monstrous new math. First came the men, the rootstock, as she'd code them later in her secret journal, shamelessly borrowing her father's brutal shipping jargon for prime human cargo packed tight in holds bound for New Orleans. Jacob rocketed straight to the top of her blood-stained list. 26 years old, the blacksmith whose shoulders sprawled broad as the massive forge anvil he swung daily like it was a feather, lungs pumping like blacksmith's bellows from years feeding hell-hot coals into roaring furnaces that glowed like Satan's eyes. No ugly whip scars crisscrossing his back to mar the canvas, teeth straight and wolf-strong when he cracked pecans at supper with a snap that echoed like musket fire. Already father to 2 sturdy boys scampering underfoot, proven fertile as spring floodwaters. Next prowled Amos, 29, the flatboat hand with palms calloused thick as boot leather from poling heavy cotton loads down to New Orleans markets through churning currents, legs like steam pistons that never buckled in knee-deep gumbo mud from canefield dawn to dusk. Then Silas, 24, field lead with a wrestler's bone-crushing grip and eyes darting quicksilver fast. Clever, maybe too clever for perfect compliance, but his potent seed would dilute safely in the mix. She marked 8 prime specimens in total, her pencil scratching furious shorthand traits into the notebook's margins like a mad prophet inscribing doom. Jacob, peak vigor, compliant as clay. Amos, endurance eternal, no lurking ailments. Avoid fever-prone weaklings at all costs. No trembling weaklings, no hot-tempered runaways simmering with defiance. These weren't lovers whispering in the dark or husbands sharing quilts. They were dormant machines primed for activation, human pistons in her grand engine of empire. The women fell under the same merciless dissecting lens, the soil, fertile earth meticulously prepared to receive the planting and yield harvests for decades. Eliza led the ranks at 22, already mother to 3 live births, and nursing a 4th with hips widened battle-scarred from labour, breasts heavy and milk-laden signalling stock that bred true and strong. No tragic history of lost babies snatched by cradle fever or nagging womanly complaints that doomed lesser wombs. Ruth, 19 and lithe as a river otter but tough as boiled leather, who'd cheated death in the 31 flood by swimming a grueling quarter-mile through raging currents with a squalling toddler clamped to her back like a barnacle. Lila, 25, the kitchen hand with steady hands that never fumbled a boiling potash, and a quiet obedience bordering on the eerie, supernatural. Madeline paced the ragged cabin lines slow and predatory, pausing to lift a squirming child's chin with clinical detachment to inspect teeth and eyes, test a man's crushing grip on her forearm there, cold as a horse trader at the fiercest New Orleans auction block, but quieter, hidden deep in the dawn mist to evade watchful eyes. Whispers rippled outward, like stones skipped across still water. Mrs. walk in early today. Something bad coming, sure as sunrise. The air thickened to syrup with primal unease. Old folks muttering half-remembered Bible verses about Pharaoh's plagues raining judgment. Children falling unnaturally silent as her shadow swallowed the dirt. Back in the big house by mid-morning, sweat beading her brow like forbidden jewels, Madeline bolted her study door with a decisive click, this time barricading not just parish busybodies, but her own flesh and blood. Henry, the elder son at 14, pounded once on the thick oak panel with a fist like his father's, voice cracking through boyish confusion into something edged with fear. "Mama, folks down in the quarters say you're choosing who stays, who goes to the block." She cracked the door just a sliver, her face a flawless mask of maternal calm laced with steel. "Mind your lessons, Henry. The estate needs strong hands now to survive. Yours included. Don't think you're exempt." Lucian, ever shadowing his brother like a loyal hound, caught her hawkish eye through the gap, those sharp, angular features mirroring her own predatory profile, already hinting at the whip-wielding man he'd become under her forging. She slammed the door firm as a vault. But oh, the seed was planted deep now. They were assets too, ripe young vines ripening for later, bloodier harvests when the merciless math screamed for fresh vigor straight from LeClerc veins. By noon, her journal swelled like a glutton, columns of damning names crossed with surgical arrows, projected yields sprawling like a cotton planter mapping endless rows under a punishing sun. Jacob X. Eliza, harvest. Q1 1833, double yields probable. Amos X. Ruth, twins near certain, legs forged for mud. Timelines calculated with the ruthless precision of a banker's compounding interest. Babies swelling bellies in 9 months sharp, sturdy toddlers by year 3 chasing chickens, field-ready labourers by 15 if the twin demons of malaria and dysentery spared their fragile frames. No waiting passive for natural whims of lust or chance, forced pairings orchestrated like clockwork, monitored diets pumped with extra cornmeal gruel and blackstrap molasses to fatten the breeders like prize hogs, herbal tonics plucked from the kitchen garden to encourage fertile cycles on command. Secrecy armoured like a fortress, heavy locks clanging on every journal, coded French Creole slang twisting innocent words into abomination. Plantation forcée, forced planting. Fat silver bribes slipped to the old downriver midwife, whose gnarled hands had delivered her own boys into this world. The first planting struck that very night, under a moonless sky bloated thick with roiling thunderheads promising biblical wrath. Jacob got summoned to the big house after supper's corn mush, official story fed to prying ears. Mending the parlour hearth before it crumbles. Madeline met him in the suffocating shadows of the kitchen annex, far from glowing windows or wandering eyes, her voice dropping to low, unyielding steel that brooked no rebellion. "You do this clean. Your boys eat double rations from here to Christmas. Fight it, and they're first on the Natchez block, chained and sold by week's end. No candlelit romance, no brutish violence to raise alarms, just cold, mechanical transaction, a deal struck in flesh." He nodded once, eyes hollowed out like river-worn stones, knowing refusal meant the auctioneer's hammer shattering his world for kin. What passed between them in that stifling dark was pure mechanism, no tenderness spared, recorded later in her cipher with chilling detachment. Rootstock 1 deployed, soil receptive, clear skies for growth, no pleasure flickering for her iron heart, no shred of humanity granted, just the first triumphant tick in her swelling ledger of doom. Word ignited through the quarters like swamp fever, spreading hot and unstoppable. Mrs. ain't just owning us now, she pairing deliberate, cold-blooded. Not for Christmas bonuses of extra fatback or rare Sundays off from the hoe, but something far colder, like back-alley dogfighters picking the meanest sires for blood sport pits. Ruth wept silent tears into her threadbare apron when Amos got yanked aside next week, his flatboat calluses no shield. Lila stared blank-eyed as void when her own summons slithered in, hands trembling on the pot handle. The men trudged back from annex shadows silent as graves, shoulders slumped under invisible anvils of shame, gazes sliding away from wives and young'uns. Children sensed the poison in the air, clinging tighter to mothers' skirts with tiny fists white-knuckled, eyes wide as moons. But who to tell in this God-forsaken wilderness? Overseer long gone chasing gold fever, parish church miles off through mud, and white folks' twisted justice meant lashes flaying backs for any slave bold enough to whisper lies. Henry sniffed the shift first, the elder boy lurking cat-silent near the kitchen at dusk, ears pricked to catch murmurs slinking from cabin doors, eyes catching Jacob's hulking shadow slipping away pre-dawn like a thief in fog. At breakfast, amid clattering tin plates, he pressed hard, voice edging toward accusation. "Mama, why Jacob sleeping out in the barn like a stray dog? Folks talking low, something wrong." Madeline's fork hovered mid-air, glinting like a dagger, then resumed its scrape with icy calm. "Plantation business, son. Deep matters you'll learn your part in soon enough. Eat." Lucien, quieter than mist, watched her journal vanish swift into a drawer like contraband, his clever fingers already itching to puzzle the locks like a forbidden puzzle box, hiding treasures and terrors. Weeks blurred into a haze of relentless monitoring. Extra rations slipped sly to the chosen stock under cover of routine, tonic brews bubbling suspicious for Eliza's monthly vigor to keep cycles locked on command. By July's blistering peak, sun hammering like God's own hammer, confirmations rolled in like thunder, bellies swelling undeniable, dawn nausea wrenching guts in the fields. Madeline's empire took root deep and insidious, invisible as gnarled roots twisting under gumbo soil, strangling life unseen. Neighbours at St. Landry Church picnics raised glasses in toast to Belle Rive's sudden luck. No fire sales of hands or land, fields holding steady against the odds. They clinked syllables over creamy syllabub, praising her widow's grit and blessings from above. None glimpsed the lengthening shadow slinking from her study window at midnight, where ledger columns bloated fat with futures engineered in stolen blood and shattered souls. But cracks whispered early, faint as spider silk snapping. Old field hand Moses, bent like ancient oak, muttered too loud by firelight flicker one night. "She breedin' devils in that big house now. Blood call blood, mark my words." Whispers of midnight runs swirled thicker, and up in the house, Henri's innocent questions honed sharp as new hoes, his fists clenching white-knuckled at night in boyish rage. The roots were planted deep, thirsting for growth, but empires grown in such profane darkness always draw storms, black and biblical, howling on the horizon. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Big House. Imagine the unrelenting summer of 1833 descending on Belle Rive like a biblical plague. Air so thick with heat, it clung to your skin like a second layer of sweat. Dust devils dancing across the fields, turning everything to a hazy, shimmering mirage. 7 months had passed since that first shadowy planting under the moonless sky, and Madeline's invisible empire was no longer just a cold entry in her journal. It pulsed with forbidden life. Eliza waddled through her days heavy with Jacob's child, her face etched with a constant grimace from nausea that twisted her guts no matter how much extra cornmeal or molasses Madeline slipped into her rations. Ruth's belly swelled subtly under Amos's seed, her once steady eyes now darting like a cornered doe's every time the widow's silhouette appeared on the gallery overlook. Lila, the quiet kitchen hand, whispered frantic prayers to long-forgotten African gods under her breath at night, even as the undeniable swell of her own pregnancy took root, proof of the system's merciless grind. In Madeline's unfeeling calculus, it was pure success. 3 harvests, confirmed and counting, with weekly pairings locked in like clockwork gears. But empires don't grow on barren soil. They demand expansion, and that's when the darkness seeped from the quarters into the heart of the big house itself, where her own sons, Henri and Lucien, were ripening like the blood-bound tools she'd always calculated them to be. Madeline moved with the subtlety of a spider spinning silk, testing her boys as overseers in training long before she demanded their full surrender. Henri, now 15 and shooting up like a young oak, stood taller than his father Etienne had ever managed, his blacksmith arms, forged from years hauling glowing coals and swinging hammers, matching Jacob's raw power pound for pound. She'd caught him more than once, leaning on a fence post at dusk, eyes burning with a volatile mix of resentment and hunger as he scanned the fields. This was his birthright after all, teetering on the edge of ruin through a widow's fragile grip, unless he seized the reins tighter. One sweltering July afternoon, with cicadas screaming an apocalyptic chorus loud enough to drown out the devil himself, she summoned him to the study. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, sealing in the stale scent of ink and whale oil smoke. Her journal lay splayed open on the desk like an altar, coded arrows snaking across pages. Rootstock 1, Jacob, times. Soil 3, Lila, projecting yields of twins by spring, timelines branching into decades of engineered labor. The plantation survives on strength, Henri, she murmured, her voice smooth as polished river silk, those piercing green eyes locking onto his. Not prayers or pity. Your strength will secure it forever. Tonight, Ruth needs guidance. She's resisting her pairing with Amos, stubborn girl. Show her the cost of disloyalty. Henry froze in the doorway, a bead of sweat tracing slow from his temple down his cheek, glistening like a tear he wouldn't shed. He'd seen the late-night summonses flickering like ghosts in the kitchen windows, heard the hushed murmurs rippling through the quarters like wind through cane. Mrs. playing God with our blood now, pairing us like hounds at a fight. But Mama's eyes, mirror images of his own, cold emeralds that saw through flesh to bone, left no crack for questions, no space for the boyish outrage bubbling in his chest. It's business, son, she pressed, her long finger tapping the ledger with rhythmic insistence, like a metronome counting down to doom. Do this, and no auctions rip families apart at Natchez. Fight it, and Belle Grove feeds straight to the river, your future with it. That night, under the same suffocating shadows of the kitchen annex where Jacob had first bent to her will, Henri crossed the unthinkable line. Ruth, 20 now and trembling like a leaf in a gale, said nothing, her coerced silence purchased with whispered threats to her baby sister still too young for the fields. Madeline noted it later in crisp, detached cipher. Rootstock 5, Henri, deployed. Legacy phase initiated. No flicker of horror in her script, no maternal pause, just mechanical efficiency. Her son's raw vigor now blended into the human machinery, binding him genetically to the empire in ways no chain could match. Lucien, the younger brother at just 12, watched it all unfold with a sharpness that bordered on feral, his wiry frame belying the fox-like cunning brewing inside. He wasn't the type to pound on doors like Henri, fists flying in clumsy rage. No, Lucien picked locks, sleek and silent as a shadow slipping through cracks. One heavy dusk, while Madeline stood over Eliza in the quarters, monitoring her progress with steaming herbal tonics brewed by the downriver midwife, Auntie Claire, a Creole woman with gnarled hands and a silver payment guaranteeing her silence. He bent a scavenged wire into the study keyhole. The tumblers clicked like conspirators, and the journal's pages hit him like a gut shot from a dueling pistol. Sprawling charts of his mother's plantings, familiar names from the quarters crossed out and repaired with H. LeClerc, and looming inevitable, L. LeClerc. His own blood, weaponized into this abomination. Rage boiled quiet in his veins, father dead from fever and folly, mother revealed as a spider at the center of a web spun from their family's shame. He burned no pages, whispered no accusations. Instead, he turned predator to protector, shadowing the chosen ones by day, slipping fist-sized hunks of cornbread to Jacob during forge breaks under the guise of brothers' scraps, murmuring to Ruth in passing about, better days coming if we hold smart. But the system's grind birthed its first true victims not from open rebellion, but from the relentless, soul-crushing churn of flesh treated as inventory. Old Moses, the muttering elder with Bible verses scarred into his memory, paid the price first, caught by starlight spreading devil-breeding talk around the communal fire, his gravel voice carrying warnings of Pharaoh's plagues revisited. Dawn broke cold and merciless. Madeline ordered Henri to deliver the lesson himself. 20 lashes cracked across the yard, each one splitting Moses's back open as the entire quarters watched in frozen silence, children buried in their mothers' skirts. Example, she called it from the gallery, arms folded like a queen surveying her domain. But Moses's blood soaked deep into the red dirt, turning it black, and the whispers morphed into something sharper. Escape routes scouted along the Mississippi's fog-shrouded bends, skiffs hidden in the canebrakes. Then came Ruth's breaking, a horror that clawed straight from the ledger's pages. Henry's coerced guidance had taken root at first, but her body rebelled in fury. Fever clawed into her post-pairing, Auntie Claire's herbs wilting useless against the raging infection. One August midnight, under a sky bruised purple with storm clouds, Ruth miscarried in blinding agony, blood pooling thick and dark on her cabin floor, like spilled ink from Madeline's pen. Lila stumbled in at first light, finding her cold and still, eyes staring blank at the rafters. No funeral tears, no mournful songs, just a hasty pine box dragged to the levee for the gators, one less line slashed from the ledger. Madeline crossed her out without pause. Soil too failed. Reallocate Amos to Lila. Henry transformed quickest, the stain seeping into his every breath. The act haunted him. Nights pacing the wide gallery under moth-swarmed lamps, fists clenched bone-white on the railings, Ruth's ghost flickering in every elongated shadow cast by swaying Spanish moss. At supper, amid clattering plates and Lucian's probing stares, he'd snap like dry tinder. Mama knows best. Fields need hands, lots of them. But doubt festered like an untreated wound. When Madeline summoned him again weeks later, this time for Eliza, hollow-eyed and spiritually widowed after Jacob's sail upriver, cold cash to patch crumbling levees, he halted at the annex door, boots rooted to the threshold. "This ain't right, Mama. Ruth, she died 'cause of it." Her response cracked sharp as gospel thunder, a backhand across his cheek that split his lip, drawing blood to match the dirt. "Right died with your father, boy. Blood builds empires, yours included." He went, but slower now, mechanical as the pairings he'd come to loathe, and the whip in his future overseer's hand landed heavier on suspected runaways, as if punishing the fields for his own sins. To the parish outsiders, Belle Rive was a portrait of widow's triumph. At St. Landry Church socials, amid the clink of syllabub glasses and the fiddle's twang, Madeline charmed like a southern belle reborn, spinning tales of providence and grit, how her cotton held steady against the odds, no desperate sales yet to shame the family name. Lawyer Duval hoisted a glass high. "Madame's boys stepping up fine. Real LeClerc men now." None caught the midnight skiff of Auntie Claire gliding silent up the river, unloading vials of abortifacients for unplanned pregnancies blooming outside the ledger's lines, nor spotted Lucian's hidden corncob tallies, each notched kernel marking a bred soul, stuffed under his mattress like contraband dynamite. But inside the house, shadows thickened to pitch. Henry's nightmares clawing through thin floorboards in guttural moans, Lucien's lockpicking evolving into pilfered journal scraps folded tight in his boot heels. By the time fall's first yellow leaves spiraled down like dying embers, the empire sprawled bloated and vulnerable. 5 pregnancies thriving in the quarters, Henri blood deep in the machine he'd helped forge, Lucien simmering with a revolt that burned colder than any fever. Victims piled unseen in the margins, Ruth's unmarked levee grave, Moses hobbling on fresh whip scars, Eliza's hollow eyes staring through the world after Jacob's chains rattled away on a Natchez flatboat. Madeline toasted alone in her study that night, journal swollen fat with engineered futures branching like veins. But blood calls to blood. as old Moses had first warned in the firelight. Henry's whip hand began to tremble mid-swing. Lucian's secrets multiplied like rats in the walls. The shadows in the big house weren't merely hiding horrors anymore. They were sharpening knives, edge by gleaming edge, for the reckoning to come. Chapter 4. The Empire's Collapse Picture. Winter, 1835, gripping Belle Rive like the cold, unyielding claws of some vengeful river spirit. Rare Louisiana frosts painting the Mississippi's muddy edges with silvery ice. Cotton bowls hanging frozen and brittle in the fields like shattered glass ornaments, and a bone-chilling wind slicing through the quarter's flimsy palmetto roofs, no matter how high the enslaved families banked their meager cook fires. Nearly 3 full years into Madeline LeClerc's blood-soaked ledger reign, her invisible empire had clawed its way to a precarious zenith. 12 harvests, now born and thriving in the shadows, half the direct fruit of her ruthlessly engineered pairings, the other half from the grim follow-on breedings she'd forced among her chosen stock. Eliza's firstborn, a strapping boy she dared name Little Jacob after his father, sold upriver 2 years back for levy patch cash, already toddled through the dust with an unnatural vigor that turned heads, his flickering green eyes catching the firelight, just like his grandmother's piercing stare. The fields, coaxed back to grudging life by this swelling workforce, yielded just enough to settle Lawyer Duval's mounting fees and bribe in a new overseer. Grimshaw, a scar-faced brute fresh from Natchez auctions, whose whip sang without question or mercy. Parish tongues wagged endlessly at St. Landry Church suppers about Belle Rive's miracle widow, her sons now towering at 17 and 14, striding the cotton rows like young plantation kings born to rule. But empires built on twisted flesh and forced blood always crack under their own grotesque weight, and the knives we'd seen sharpening in the big house shadows now glinted cold and lethal in the open light. It all ignited with a birth that ripped through the fragile peace of the big house like a thunderclap from hell itself. Lila, belly grotesquely swollen from Henry's second coerced guidance, her body a roadmap of scars from endless pairings, laboured through a howling February gale in the stifling confines of the kitchen annex, Auntie Claire's herbal poultices steaming uselessly on the sooty hearth like false promises. The midwife, her eyes sunken hollows from years of coerced silence and bloodied hands, worked through the night with grim determination, delivering twins as the storm raged outside. A girl pale as fresh-churned milk, with delicate auburn wisps curling at her temples, and a boy stamped unmistakably with the LeClerc hawk nose, sharp as a blade. But victory soured to tragedy in heartbeat. Lila hemorrhaged rivers of blood, her frame spent beyond breaking from back-to-back breedings that had hollowed her out like a gutted fish, fever boiling through her veins like liquid fire. As the first grey crack of dawn clawed through the shutters, she gasped her final defiance, clutching the girl's tiny, flailing fist to her chest. No more. Blood chains. Set 'em free. Henry burst through the annex door mid-prayer, his face drained to ashen parchment. He'd fathered these innocents, his own half-siblings, in the twisted mathematics of his mother's ledger. For the first time, raw defiance blazed in his eyes. No more annex nights, Mama. This ends. Now. Madeline slapped her journal shut with a crack like gunfire, her voice dripping venom. Defy me, boy, and Grimshaw auctions your get first. Those twins, straight to the deepest sugar hells of Louisiana. Lucien struck next. His fox-like cunning finally boiled over into calculated fury after months of pilfered journal pages mapping the full, nauseating horror. 20 coded deployments sprawled across the leaves, family trees projected to branch into 50 field-ready hands by 1850, every line laced with LeClerc blood like poison ivy. At just 14, he was small, wiry, unremarkable, but sly as a canebrake viper. He dosed Grimshaw's private well water with nightshade berries plucked from the untended garden patch, just enough toxin to sicken without killing outright, sending the brute howling to Baton Rouge for cures from fancy doctors who'd bleed him dry. With Grimshaw vanished and the overseer's cabin empty, Lucienne rallied the quarters under the perfect cover of a corn-husking frolic, golden husks flying in the firelit yard like festive confetti masking their whispers. Jacob's kin gathered close. Amos's widow, Ruth's grieving sister, eyes still red from levee graves. Old Moses, hobbling forward on whip scars that gleamed white in the moonlight. "Blood call blood," Moses rasped, his gravel voice echoing the warning he'd first spat years before. They plotted for Mardi Gras, 1835, when every white eye in the parish glued itself to New Orleans' riotous revels, masked balls, riverboat jazz, and king cakes drowning out the world's sins. Escape by skiffs painted driftwood grey, poling silent through fog-choked bends toward whispers of free soil up in Illinois. Madeline sensed the fracture spiderwebbing through her domain like ice on the river, her instincts sharpening to paranoia. She doubled the locks on every door, slipped abortifacients into the rations of any stray pregnancies blooming outside her ledger's iron lines. Even summoned Henri for one final desperate pairing with a wide-eyed new girl dragged trembling from the fields. Barely 16, her pleas muffled by Grimshaw's lingering shadow. But Henry's revolt erupted full and final in the dead of that midnight, a confrontation exploding in the study like bottled lightning. Journal ripped open in his massive hands, coded pages fluttering to the floor like doomed moths circling a flame. "You bred us into monsters, Mama. Jacob, Eliza, our blood mixed in the dirt, slaved forever." Lucienne burst in behind him, wire key glinting like a dagger, the quarter's rising whispers now a low, ominous roar swelling outside the windows like an approaching storm. Madeline laughed at first, cold and crystalline as breaking ice. "Empires demand sacrifice, fools. Yours built mine." But Henri's fist connected with bone-crunching force, toppling the whale oil lamp in a cascade of shattering glass. Flames leaped greedy and ravenous across the desk, devouring ledgers in hungry gulps, consuming the Morocco spine of mon héritage and years of ciphered atrocities in thick, acrid smoke that choked the air like the devil's own breath. The quarters rose as the big house fire bells clanged wild into the night. No pitchforks waving, no bloodbath of Hollywood rebellion, just a swift, spectral exodus. 20 of the strongest vanished into the river's fog-shrouded bends like ghosts melting into mist, skiffs poling silent and desperate toward free soil whispers in far-off Illinois. Little Jacob clutched in Eliza's arms, the newborns bundled tight against Lucien's chest, their tiny cries swallowed by the gale. Grimshaw staggered back days later, horses lamed by cunningly cut traces, his bellows of rage echoing useless over empty cabins. Lawyer Duval arrived at week's end, ash-sifting the gutted study with gloved hands, charred stubs of paper hinting at unspeakable atrocities, but no damning proof left intact. Madeline's silver tongue already spinning the yarn to parish gossips. Runaway riot sparked a lightning-strike blaze, pure misfortune. The Empire's architect herself vanished overnight, swallowed by the night like smoke up the chimney. Some swore on Bibles they spotted her fleeing upriver on a flatboat steamer, journal remnants sewn into the lining of her skirts, eyes fixed on raw new lands in wild Texas frontiers. Others whispered darker tales around river lamps, Haiti's old ghosts calling back the plantocracy daughter, dragging her into the revolts she'd fled as a girl, swallowed whole by the same blood tides she'd unleashed. Belle Rive crumbled with ferocious speed. Auctioneers' hammers chopped it to pieces for the gnawing debts, fields reverting to primordial swamp where alligators basked indifferent. Henri and Lucien vanished with the runaways, their names surfacing years later in tattered abolitionist pamphlets circulated in Boston attics. LeClerc brothers, witnesses to hell's own plantation. The babies scattered into freedom's brutal uncertainty, their inherited LeClerc eyes, green and haunted, scanning endless horizons for safety that never quite came. By 1840, parish law had buried the raw truth under layers of cotton gossip and Sunday sermons. No weathered marker for Lila's annex grave, no faded record of Ruth's levee burial, or Moses's scarred defiance. But downriver folk still swapped tales around flickering lamps and chicory coffee. The widow who'd tried to breed her legacy into eternity, only to watch it unravel into oblivion, undone by the very blood she'd chained and twisted. In dusty courthouses from Baton Rouge to Natchez, faint hints lingered like stubborn stains. Burned scraps Duval locked away in iron strongboxes. Whispers in auction ledgers of odd-eyed stock tracing back to Belle Rive. Slaves with a planter's gaze that unsettled buyers. Madeline's invisible empire hadn't fallen to Yankees or lawmen marching with warrants. No, it collapsed inward from the human fire she'd ignited herself. Sons forged into avengers by her own hand, quarters swelling into an unstoppable tide of retribution. And somewhere out there, in choking smoke, alligator-haunted swamp, or the restless sea, her final heritage echoed unanswered, a ghost ledger no mighty river could ever hope to wash clean.